last name is Frankfurt. So Lauren Frankfurt. And I'm, in Austin. I'm a postpartum doula. I'm a novice herbalist, and I'm writing my Substack called Nightlight. And I'm a mother.
That's a beautiful introduction. I'll let that stand. I'm Cadence. This is Busybody Podcast. Thank you. Thank you for being on. I'm thrilled to have you. I want to start right with what you just said, that a lot of people who are not mothers, and even people who are like, I'm not interested in any of the things you're interested in, are enjoying reading your newsletter. Because I think that I feel the same way, except I am interested in some of the things that you're writing. But I'm not a mother, and I'm like, it's very relatable. There's something about the way that you write that feels very like open, and it's just a beautiful perspective on just the life that you're living and carving for yourself. But there's something that you are kind of teaching or kind of sharing. Here's something that you could do that feels like it's still relatable, even though it like not a lot of the things that you're doing in your daily life are things that I'm doing, or apparently many of your readers.
Yeah, maybe honestly none of them. I think I'm sure some people have some touch on
the mother's newsletter for non-mothers.
I guess so. Yeah. And I like that. I think that that's really fantastic. And I can think of times in my life where I've really enjoyed reading someone's writing or following them on Instagram, and we don't really have anything in common.
Yeah.
Or I guess we do have something in common. It's just not the things that are surface level being presented, right? Like obviously people I think who like what I'm writing, they're interested in something that I'm offering. It's just they're like not also taking care of a toddler and growing tomatoes and learning how to make medicinal mushroom extractions or whatever. I think that's really great. And I've really, really enjoyed people replying back to me, just saying, hi, I really liked this. Or
people don't realize how important that is. If I could like attach something to the end of anything I do, that's just like, feel free to tell me you like this.
Please do.
Yeah. It matters so much that, one puts so much effort into anything that goes out, and anyone just saying, even when someone just like comments under some post, like, oh, this helped me so much the other day, or I tried this, I'm just like, a real person.
Yeah. Because it can feel, putting things online, writing or a reel about something you could do for your hips. It just feels like you're just shouting into the void sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think somehow your relatability in this realm is partly due to like your relationship to becoming a mother? I'm just thinking off the top of my head, just because I knew you before and you weren't like doggedly trying to be a mom, or I don't know, do you think that might be part of it, that you're kind of processing in real time?
Yeah, I think it has to be, probably. I mean, people come to being mothers so many different ways, and I don't think it's simple for anyone. There's so much complexity there, and it's a huge life transition. Like the change that happens in your brain, like your physical brain matter, I guess, when you become a mother, which is called matrescence, is like comparable to the changes that happen when you go through puberty too. Sure. Like there's just so much going on. And you really are a different person on the other side. And I think there's a lot of meaning to be made from that. There's a lot of things to be said about that and reflection to be done. And I do think that most people find that relatable, even if they're not mothers or never going to become a mother, because we've all been through big periods of transition and change. And
I feel like that might also be part of it, because I think the way that you write, a lot of kind of mother content does turn me off, because it's very like kind of like, I'm living a very special life that you can't understand, and yours is much more just like, this is what my life is like, and I'm sharing it. And that's super relatable, because what you just said, we've all gone through transitions or growth periods, or times where we're just learning who we are in a new state, basically. And that's extremely relatable to everybody. And also you can be mothers in so many different ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, specifically, I wanted you on because your latest one was on the subject of hunger. And I was thinking, obviously we met in kind of the physical world through yoga and movement and body knowledge. And hunger is such a ongoing, interesting subject for me. And I had a writer and journalist on, Virginia Heffernan, talking about Ozempic. And she wrote a great piece about how, this drug that just destroys your hunger, what a bizarre and kind of anti-life way of living that is. And then I thought your piece so beautifully kind of spoke to that, speaking about this kind of really persistent, huge hunger. And just on a purely factual or kind of day-to-day, I just feel like no one talks about that with new moms. And yet all my clients who are new moms, and I count new moms up till your kid is 4 years old, they all talk to me about being hungry all the time. I literally just had a session with someone the other day who we had a little holistic session, non-movement session, just talking about food stuff, where she was just like, what can I do? I find myself at 3:30 in the morning just scorfing food. And so we came up with the fact that she should have 2 dinners, because really it was because she keeps hoping, she's wishful thinking that her son will sleep through the night. And then it just doesn't happen. And so she ends up all night. And I was like, you have to prepare for the second day that you have. So you have dinner at 6, 7 with your family. You got to have another dinner at 10 for this marathon that you have at night. And she's breastfeeding and all that stuff. So, and she said once she did that, she's like, that totally worked. And now I'm not just eating a box of crackers at 4 a.m. being like, I'm starving and this is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was a kind of permission, because I think no one talks about that hunger. And so she still had this thought in her mind, oh, that seems like too much. Do I really need or deserve that much food? That seems like too much. And once I heard her story, I was like, what are you talking about? You're up for hours and hours and hours. This is where we get our energy from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the conversation about Ozempic is really interesting, because we have this sometimes overt and sometimes kind of covert pressure, especially as women, to annihilate any kind of hunger that we have, especially hunger for food or nourishment. Especially
vigorous hunger. I think to really be, kind of primally hungry is really not allowed in the feminine space.
I think for a lot of people, it's embarrassing to be hungry. I mean, and I think that's wrapped up in all sorts of various embarrassments we have about being embodied just in general. Yeah. And it was easier, not easy, for me to kind of capitulate to that and kind of play that game before I had a baby. And then what was so remarkable to me was after I gave birth, my body was like, you cannot pretend anymore. Like this can be dealt with later, or you can eat later. It's right. Has to happen now. And it's really urgent. Like eating the second dinner to get through a very wakeful night. The biological, my body's biological needs were just absolutely so loud. And I think maybe they had always been, and it was easier to deal with their loudness in a different way before I had a baby. But something like a switch flipped for me 24 hours after I gave birth, and it just never hasn't changed. I'm still breastfeeding and not totally sleeping through the night, but so I don't know what will happen in the future, what my relationship to the feeling of my hunger will be. But I think this has been a real initiation for me in honoring and not ascribing meaning to the sensations of hunger, except exactly, because of course the meaning is just your body needs energy. It needs protein, fat, and carbs. It needs all 3 of them. Yeah. And now pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think something that surprised me about that was I had heard a lot of women talk about cravings during pregnancy and being really thirsty postpartum because of nursing. But I hadn't. My experience had not met someone else's experience where they were talking about just astonishing hunger. And I'll like never forget the expression on the faces of some of my visiting family members after my son was born, because we would sit down to eat and I would eat a whole meal. And then I would be like, I am still so hungry.
Yeah.
And I would just eat a second one, you know, like I had to.
Yeah.
And people were like, whoa, really? And I was like, yeah. And I just can't believe that there's something wrong with me or that this is special. Like this has to be happening to everybody.
Yeah. And I think also it's very interesting because we're kind of taught subtly or overtly to interrogate our hunger and potentially not to believe it and all these things. And at the same time, we're told to like eat within your hunger, like, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's how you should know, like, are you really hungry? Or are you stressed? And like, are you full? Like, do you know when you're full? And I've experienced that kind of bizarre, unending hunger a few times from when I was in dance intensives when I was younger, and we were literally dancing. It would happen later on, like if they were 6-week, 8-week programs. So you could imagine like some kind of, like the amount of energy drain had kind of built up. So 6 weeks into an 8-week program, we're dancing all day, every day, like from 9 to 9, basically. And suddenly my friends and I, we would just be ravenously hungry. And it's amazing how much food you can put down. I remember, I'll never forget this. We all went out to a diner, and this is like a known thing for athletes and dancers, like just putting away huge amounts of food. We all went out to a diner and we got like one of those diner breakfasts where you get like the stack of pancakes and you get eggs and all that stuff. We ate the whole thing with not feeling full at all. And then asked the waitress if they had dessert, and she went pale. It was like she thought we were like, like I don't know what, werewolves or something. Because we were just like, we could do the whole thing again. But if you have pie, we'll just eat some pie. But I remember also like a lot of our injuries would go away after that. Like we would get so run down, and then we would eat so much for like 2 days or something. And then a lot of like the problems that we were having, the inflammation, all kinds of things that were, you know, clearly our body could start repairing. Like there was actually a true need. And I also just think it's amazing because it is pretty fascinating when your body is truly that hungry that you can actually not be full and be putting just like really an enormous amount of food down your gullet, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think immediately after having a baby, something similar was happening for me because I did have like healing to do. I had injuries from birth. And when I like looked in the mirror after I got home, like I could see that the bones of my pelvis were in different places, which is normal and makes sense. Yeah. But nonetheless, I was surprised at how obvious it was to my eye that was happening. And so things needed to like come back together, and there needed to be like healing and regeneration. And of course, those things don't happen just because you're breathing and sipping water.
Yeah. And I think often there's this really kind of also kind of curated idea of the recovering mother, where it's like bone broths and like eating vegetables. And again, people aren't just talking about housing a pizza or like whatever you're needing, because when your body is really hungry, it's also just going to ask for really high density food. And that's like in my experience, which now I'm linking of just in the dance world. And another workshop I remember I took, we all went out afterwards and just got like the cheesiest burritos. And it was just like after a week of, again, just like dancing all day, everyone was starving, and we just ate like a huge portion of just like rice and meat and cheese, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have done that in the last 2 years, like many, many, many times. And I have never felt like more vital life force energy than I have since I kind of gave up the idea of clean eating. And I mean, I want to be careful of how I talk about it, because I think, you know, true nourishment is important, but what do we even mean by that? Like, I think first and foremost, we mean eating enough.
Yeah.
Like, what is more important in terms of nourishment than eating enough to meet the energy needs of your body, which are really high when you're an athlete, when you've had a baby, when you're breastfeeding. Yeah. And I think I mentioned in my newsletter about this, that I went to this mother circle and we were just served this woefully inadequate, serving of food.
Vegetable soup,
vegetable soup, after having heard like a little bit of a speech about how important it is to be nourished as mothers. And it was disappointing. And even 2 years into this ongoing relationship that I have with my hunger, I felt embarrassed that it wasn't enough for me.
Yeah.
And I noticed that embarrassment, and I'm glad that I was able to like push up against it. Like, no, actually, this was not adequate. This was not lunch. This was like an appetizer.
Yeah.
and it was delicious and wonderful, but I just don't think that any of the fully grown adults who were there, who were eating that left and didn't need to eat again immediately.
Yeah. Can you speak a bit to how you used to think about food before? Because I know you have a long-standing practice with yoga, and you could really call on a lot of roots of being someone who's very in touch with your body.
Yeah.
And also fully in a world that has a lot of, the yoga world, and like, there's a lot in there about cleanliness and, putting morals into all kinds of places where there really should not be any.
Yeah, there really is. It can be kind of insidious. I think my history with food is pretty much that I feel like I've tried in my lifetime most approaches to eating that one could try. When I was a teenager, I was a vegetarian for many years. When I went to college, I kind of returned to being an omnivore, and then returned to being a vegetarian. And then I started to have really bad acne. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole, like, what can I do to heal my skin? Like, to not have acne anymore. And then I was like exposed to keto and paleo and Whole30.
Right.
And I have done all of those things. I'm not really so much keto, but definitely like a lot of time in the paleo world. And I would just constantly consume information about nutrition and food and clean eating and anti-inflammatory eating.
Yeah. That's it.
And I knew so much, and I started to feel very rigid about what I would eat. I was really afraid of eating out because of seed oils. And there's just so many different rabbit holes.
we have a very similar background. I think if you're a certain kind of person who got exposed to kind of alternative quote unquote health early, it's like, I'm grateful that I was doing that and not eating like 100-calorie like Pringle snacks or whatever, but it was no less disturbed and rigid and not bringing any joy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is what was happening to me. I was definitely eating enough food. I was definitely eating all of the, I was definitely eating protein, fat, and carbs all the time, but I was very concerned with like the quality of the food that I was eating, to the point that it was robbing me of the joy of eating. And I think one of the things that my intense hunger in motherhood, combined with like how little time and energy I had, especially at the beginning, to devote to what exactly I was eating, like one of the gifts that combination of things gave me was the freedom to just be like, this is what I'm eating. And and then nothing bad happened.
Right. Exactly.
My skin didn't get bad again. I didn't have any major problems. And that was a really transformational experience.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that's so beautiful. And it's also so nuanced. It's really hard to like express that to people, because that's just kind of an experience and a connection that you're drawing. And you just made me think of this memoir that I read a million years ago. This guy, Rich Roll, back when I used to listen to white men talk about anything, which I don't anymore. But he has a podcast. His subtitles, he's the world's third fittest man or something. I don't think he is anymore, because that was like 15 years ago. But he was kind of in the forefront of that, like early 2000s, clean everything, like kind of like plant-based is what, because he wasn't a vegetarian for animal rights reasons, or vegan for animal rights reasons, but that whole plant-based movement that started where everyone was eating clean, I'm using many quotation marks, for their like kind of optimizing their health. And he has an amazing story, not to totally knock him. He literally was like a college athlete. Then he, just kind of went down the corporate spiral and became kind of an alcoholic, I guess. And then almost had a heart attack when he was like in his 40s and early 40s and just was like, what am I doing in my life? And I guess he had quit drinking and basically replaced it with fast food. And he bizarrely married a woman who was like the kind of person who has fermented things in glass jars in her fridge next to his like leftover Big Macs, which I'm always just amazed by those kinds of couples. But he turned to his wife and took some guidance from her, and literally a year later was competing in triathlons and was like the third fittest person in the world. Like he's one of these incredibly obsessive people. So this is a long story. Now I'm telling his whole stupid story, but he did 5 triathlons on 5 different Hawaiian islands in 5 days. That's what the culminating adventure of this book is. And he talks the whole time about how he's vegan and everything he does is like, powered by macadamia nuts and like all these things. But then his support team completely falls apart during this 5-day expedition. And they're not there with his magical avocado sandwiches on sprouted bread that he basically uses during all his training. So he and his friend that he does it with live on terrible Chinese takeout the whole time. Just all those seed oils. So it's like basically rancid oils if you're like in this world and you're afraid of that. Totally rancid oil. Just white starchy noodles that are like just devoid of anything. Just lived on grease and starch for 5 days and did the races and like won, was amazing. Everything was fine. His body, like everything worked. And the thing is he never pointed that part out. He didn't learn the lesson. He just was like, and we did the things and doing a triathlon every day for 5 days is very intense, and I'm like, dude, you did it and you did it on junk food. It turns out you're okay.
Yeah.
Which I think something that kills me about that narrative about anti-inflammatory eating and clean eating anything and all that whole world of just like hierarchical food, whatever it is, paleo, vegan, because it's all the same really. Is also this weird idea that we're so fragile. Like that's what I read through that. That's the subtext. We're so fragile that if you have a seed oil that's old, if you have a white piece of toast, that your body's just going to come apart. It's just going to come apart at the seams and all these terrible things are going to happen to you. And yet what you're articulating is our incredible resilience and just like how incredible the human body is and how like really, if you just listen to your body, look at all the things that you're able to do with so much ease and flexibility, actually, which makes sense given that we're still on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was listening to my body, like actually listening to my body, not saying that I was listening to my body and then like working out really hard and eating some like carefully controlled meal and then being like, I feel good, but actually listening to my body in the many quiet moments, sitting still, holding a baby, not having really anything else to do except listen to my body. What I noticed was that hunger is hunger and you have to meet it somewhere. And when I eat a plant-based meal, for example, I am still hungry when I'm done. And to me, from my experience in my living body, that's the message, right? That's the thing that I need to take away is, okay, I still am hungry. That's it. Eat more, eat something different, eat now. And there's no, like you said before, there's no moralizing to apply to that. And that can be so tricky. I'm coming from the yoga world in New York. And I will say that I heard a lot that like part of the practice of yoga and the kind of like mental ascension, I guess, that comes with doing yoga is only eating plants so that you can achieve what you're trying to achieve with yoga. And I think that's very tricky because yoga can be a very, very, very rigorous physical practice. And I am not currently convinced that a body can sustain that kind of physical movement only eating raw vegetables. Feels kind of radical to say that for me, even still. Right? But it certainly wasn't my experience. And I have known a lot of other people who have shared that experience and are scared to talk about it in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I haven't seen enough, like, meaning I wish this was publicized more. I like came across this a while ago that in Chinese medicine, there's and I could be totally wrong about this, but I read this somewhere. I read a lot about Chinese medicine, actually. And there was something that was basically saying that generally speaking, female bodies do better with an omnivore diet and definitely eating meat, and that male bodies, so we would say kind of like a yang dominant energy, do better on a more plant-based diet, which makes perfect sense, really, because it's cooling. If you're speaking in terms of like the energy of plants, cooling, watery, it's literally cooling those fires. It's bringing more balance. And I have also felt like there are so many women that seem to do much better with animal products, and there's just like this cultural weird push. Well, it's all about the daintiness and the smallness and all this stuff, to have that. If you're like this, especially like white woman doing yoga, you're supposed to be very skinny and you're supposed to be like living on nothing but steamed snow peas or something. And it's really so counter to the vigorousness that comes with a physical practice and a spiritual practice too. If you're really spiritually practicing, I mean, you like, supposedly monks they're eating a lot of rice. Like, they're totally eating a lot of calorie dense things. If you're spending hours and hours meditating with like full focus, that's not nothing. So I think also hearing you just say, actually listening to my body instead of saying that I'm listening to my body, I feel like I still question that, I still think about that, even just, recuperating from my terrible COVID experience, which I've written about in my own newsletter, questioning, like, am I being too like receptive to every need that my body has? Should I be more disciplined? In my mind, I feel like discipline is a little bit, sometimes you override what your body feels to be like, well, let's just try this different thing. There's a lot of value in that. You can push out of certainly like a lot of mental places by just being like, I don't care if I feel like laying around, I'm going to go out, I'm going to take a walk and like shift those chemicals. But on the physical sense, I'm often like, I don't feel like doing this physical activity. Should I try it? I don't feel like eating this thing. Should I eat it anyway? Should I see how my body responds? Like, that is such an ongoing question. Do you feel like literally just the chemicals that you were experiencing in your early motherhood, like really, like you said, 24 hours after, was that just like cuts to the quick of all of those things? You're no longer having a conversation with yourself. You're just like, oh, this is what has to happen.
Yeah, I do think so. That's certainly how it felt for me, where prior to, even in pregnancy, I wasn't so in touch with that yet. So really prior to giving birth, including the time prior to pregnancy, it was easy for me to be very top down, like prescribed for myself. This is what I should do today. This is what I should eat today. This is how I should exercise today, whatever it may be. And then after giving birth, it was just a combination of so many things, the hormonal chemical changes, the really like imperative need of my body to be still and rest. And how constant and incessant taking care of a newborn is really made things shift like to a bottom up approach. Like, okay, well, hunger is arising. And so there's not any reason to think about that or wonder if this mealtime, have I had a long enough intermittent fast or something? Like, no, there's no time or space to think about that. So it was like boot camp for listening to my body, really. Yeah. And I don't see myself ever going back because it's been so much better. It's been so much better. And I think too, like, this is a lifelong practice, right? Like listening to your body, this is a lifelong practice. In many ways, it is a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And I think it's totally beautiful to experiment with it. Like you were just describing, like, should I eat this and see how I feel? I don't feel like working out. I think we should have to some degree, some freedom and permission to experiment with those things and to trust ourselves. That's another really radical thing for me as a mother and a woman, is actually really trusting myself and my body and what it's telling me.
Yeah, that's huge. I think so many women, and I've just experienced this from clients having children, and there is like a real deep healing that happens. And I think like that can be the, you know, when there's content that like turns me off, it's like people are like so excited about how motherhood has changed them. And then they're like, it's this holy place and you can never understand. But I do think that like for some people, that is going to be where they're going to learn that or have that experience of that kind of deep trust and this kind of real deep confidence also. I mean, that's what I'm really hearing from you. It's like a real confidence in yourself and your body. And that is amazing. It's so beautiful. And it's like, I wish everybody could have that experience, whether or not they're going to go through motherhood, because you're speaking from a place that's like truly embodied. Like you're just literally yourself living in your body. That's where we all want to be.
Yeah.
In a way, it's unfortunate that for a lot of women, it can only happen through literally giving birth. And also for a lot of women, it doesn't happen even when they give birth.
Yeah, I think sometimes there are many just examples like in our broader culture. Sometimes the opposite happens, I think, right? Because there's so much pressure to quote unquote bounce back.
Yeah.
How soon can you start exercising? How soon can you minimize the amount of food that you're eating? Whatever it looks like in individual cases. But generally the goal is like to wear the pants you wore before you got pregnant.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not wearing the clothes I wore pre-pregnancy. And it's not even on the table as like it's not a goal that I have. It's not an option. It's not on the menu, so to speak. Like, because I feel so much just like deep resonant truth in the fact that I'm taking great care of my body by eating what I need to eat and moving in ways that support me at this time in my life, which is literally always moving with you under your guidance. And I think that there is like some discipline there, like, and that's part of the practice that I was talking about a minute ago, just that we, especially for me, I'm tired a lot of the time and I don't feel like moving in one sense, but in like a greater sense, I have this awareness that like, I feel really good when I do, when I do a recording of a Pilates class or something. And then like, oh yeah, my shoulders work again, you know? And so there is some discipline there, but the discipline is in deep relationship with my own sense of embodiment. And so it's like loving care. It's not discipline as much as it's like loving guidance. I almost feel about myself the way I feel taking care of my 2-year-old. Like,
I was about to say, it's maternal.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's beautiful. You should write about that.
Yeah.
I was going to be like, can you just go on about that? But I'm like, that could be like a whole other conversation. You need to write about that. Yeah, that's so beautifully put. I feel like I try and explain that to clients who really hate movement, that like eventually, hopefully you'll get to a place where you'll be caring for yourself in that way. And unfortunately, like quote unquote self-care and all these things have become these terrible buzzwords that they've lost all meaning. But I think you just said it so beautifully that it's in a deep resonance to your embodiment. It's not something on a little checklist or like another should really. It's just, it's that you're recognizing this will make me feel even better. It will be even more in alignment to how I want to feel, which is very different from, especially with people like ourselves who have a long history of moving. Other times where we've pushed ourselves too hard or whatever, or kind of in opposition because you're just like, well, this is what I do. I take this class every Thursday or whatever. Like, no matter what. Yeah, that's really an incredible transition to also be able to see yourself go through and articulate. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. It can be kind of an ego death, so to speak, right? Like I usually go to this class and eat this way and do these things, and then suddenly I don't do them anymore in service of this like new higher good I've identified through connection with my own body. And I think for me and probably for a lot of other people, there is something kind of painful about that. Like letting go of control might be part of it. I don't know exactly.
I also feel like letting go of you're stepping outside of a lot of society in a way. There's like an almost kind of isolation to that. Anytime we kind of step away from all the big ones, extractive capitalism, which is part of the like bounce back, look like nothing happened, even though you've been through this giant transition. Just stepping outside of any of those kind of societal norms is painful, even when you feel like it's really fulfilling.
Well, and you're exactly right about extractive capitalism, because a big clue that that's happening for me in any area of my life, eating, exercising, anything about parenting, is like, who is selling something to me really hard right now?
Yeah.
Like, you need this or else, that kind of selling. And that's a really big red flag for me. And that came up a lot when I was learning about clean eating and anti-inflammatory eating, or whatever you want to call it, all of that in air quotes. Just, there was always a book to buy or a device to buy or a thing to try that you needed to pay for a subscription to an app or something. And that's kind of in opposition to like your own embodied wisdom.
Yeah. Your own internal voice. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about, I mean, I think to me, it seems like from my perspective, just working with a lot of pregnant clients, it seems like you're rare that you've let go your pre-pregnancy genes or whatever with such seeming ease. Can you speak a little bit to, because you still live in the US, you live in the same culture that's making all that pressure, and I'm sure many baby blogs or whatever that you looked up also had little side ads about like, you can do this after 6 weeks, blah blah blah, don't worry.
You can wear a belly binder that smushes your waist back to the shape it used to be. Yeah. And these things are sold to me all the time, and on the sides of websites and on Instagram. And I think I felt like I started to think about my life and my body and my perception of how my body looks in the context of what I am willing or not willing to do to change it. And it became, because my hunger has been so intense, and my transformational hunger, it was just, there wasn't even an option for me. I am not willing to deny my body food to look a certain way anymore. It just was like, so clear and simple and obvious. I'm not willing to not eat lunch to look a certain way. I'm not willing to cut out entire food groups to look a certain way. I am willing to work with uncomfortable feelings about how my body has changed. I am willing to do that. That feels right to me. To honor the sadness that I might have at a change, like, which I interpret really as like, there were beautiful things about my life before I had a baby, and everything is different now. Right. And I think those feelings need to be honored and cared for and respected. And at the same time, like, oh yeah, that feels so tender, and I'm not willing to do something extreme to like get a little taste of what it was like before, to wear my old pants or something.
I think that is a really brilliant point. I would say that so many people who are longing for a quote unquote thinner self are actually longing for a time when they were just whatever. They were younger. It was a different time. They thought of themselves as more carefree or blah, blah, blah. And that is a real like kind of psychological trick that we can associate. That's a really beautiful point. I think I wish You should write about that one. Because I just think like, boy, do we all do that to some one extent or another. Or I've even had things where I've assumed something doesn't fit me anymore because it was from a very different time in my life. And then I'll be like, well, before I give it away, let me just try it on. I'm like, oh, it does fit me. How funny that I have this perception that I have changed so much from this person that I was when I wore this all the time. And then I'm like, oh, physically, I haven't changed that much, but boy, mentally I have. So amazing that I perceived that's large a difference. So I think that's beautiful because you're really just talking about evolving as a person and being present to that and holding that and yeah, the honesty that obviously there are things that you mourn from before being a mother and things that are different now. And, but as I try and tell people all the time, if you don't want to look like you had a baby, don't have a baby. Because you can't go back in time. You don't want to look like you did a marathon, don't do a marathon. You never talk about it like that. But once your body goes through a big deal thing, you can't go back.
Right. We're talking about bones moving, organs shifting around, and bodies change after pregnancy and birth in so many different ways. I have a friend who gave birth about a year ago, and she's taller than she was before by like half an inch. So wild. And we always, she really is used to be the same size height wise as her husband, and now is taller than him.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I've seen so many. Yeah, the body is amazing.
This is just part of it. This is just part of the big change of moving through your entire life cycle, right? Like even if you don't have a baby, bodies change as human beings age.
Yeah.
And we're just working with it all the time. And we're up against so much, I think, culturally, to just pretend like that's not a real thing. Like bodies don't age. And when they do age, they just, you can't tell by looking that it's happened. But of course you can. And so in a way, that is part of my spirituality at this point is having the spaciousness within myself to acknowledge I'm constantly going to be receiving an input from the outside world that I should be smaller than I am. And I have this enduring commitment to not feeling like I must act in response to that.
Yeah, I mean, you're really articulating a kind of radical acceptance, which is often something that I basically tell people is really the only way to heal a lot of body stuff. Like you can go to therapy for a million years or read a bunch of books, but also at the end of the day, you just have to radically be like, I'm just making a commitment to this body that I'm in. And that's it. Like, I'm just going to not do things that are negative and not supportive to this body anymore. Because at the end of the day, you're the only one who's able to do that. You can't set a bunch of app timers to tell you to drink water or whatever. You can. But at the end of the day, you just have to be like, I care about me. And I love that you were, your metric was just like, what am I willing to do? And yeah, I wish more people hit that high watermark of just I am no longer willing to just skip meals or starve myself or whatever it is, feel guilty, look in the mirror, say mean things to myself, just no longer willing to do that.
Yeah.
For what? For these voices from the void, basically.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, what need is being met by continuing to engage in restrictive behaviors. Mm-hmm. And I think there probably is a really tender, beautiful, private need beneath that for so many people. And there are actually other ways to meet that need, but besides just controlling it or quieting it or, and I think that really is, that's worth exploring for a lot of people. I mean, it certainly has been for me. And the thing that has been so radicalizing in this way about becoming a mother is to a large degree, I just don't feel like I have time to care about controlling these little things anymore. I just wear the clothes that are comfortable and fit and move on. Yeah. And it's better. I feel so much better for it. I have so much more freedom, in my whole life, but in my internal landscape, I have so much more freedom, and it's really beautiful. And I'm really it's an ongoing thing, obviously, but I much more enjoy engaging with this than making sure I never have any seed oil or refined sugar ever again.
Yes. And can I just reflect, as your friend who's known you for a couple of years now, you do just radiate a real confidence and like groundedness that I think before, when I first met you, you were much more uncertain of things and questioning things, and you haven't changed your values radically. Like as we started, you're still interested in the same things as when I first met you, but now you just have this like depth to your voice about everything. Like you're just like really rooted. And I mean, that is what I wish for all women and femme people. Basically, I think that's a place that women so rarely are able to speak from. And that's what I heard in your writing is just like, this is the fullness that I wish that we could all be operating from. This is like, this is really our right. And so it's really beautiful to see in you.
Thank you. That gives me chills, because it is our right. And beautiful transformational things happen in community. So putting together people in the same space, virtual space or real life space, who are working on these things, I think that's magic. Magic happens there. And there's, so much in just like that kind of like group energy feeling of we're all working on this same thing, which I think we've been talking about this whole time, is just true embodiment. Mm-hmm. Because this isn't a conversation really about what people should or shouldn't eat, or we're not debating nutritional studies or something like that. We're just talking about actually living in our bodies in real relationship with them.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
It's a good spot to finish. Clearly, you should be back, right? More things, and then we'll talk about them.
I will, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.